They didn't just get rich off war. They built empires from blood. While 1.3 million Americans died in uniform since 1775, just 5 families and their corporate tentacles pocketed over $1.20 trillion, not in theory, but in publicly documented contracts, insider stock trades, and war reconstruction scams. You're told wars are about freedom, but every American conflict, from the Revolution to Iraq to Ukraine, has followed the same pattern. Weapons contracts issued before the first shot, stock prices surge, costs explode, profits triple. During Vietnam, Halliburton's revenue rose 700%. In Iraq, Lockheed Martin's stock increased 1,400%. After 9/11s, Raytheon's market cap jumped by $30 billion. Since the Ukraine war began, defense firms added $250 billion in value in just 18 months. And it gets worse. The same insiders pushing for war fund think tanks own media outlets and hire the same generals who'll later sign billion-dollar contracts. War isn't a tragedy, it's an investment strategy. Let me show you who profits every time someone dies in a desert or a jungle or a city you've never heard of. Because it's not just history, it's happening right now. 10. The Bush family from war zone oil to the White House. You probably know the Bush name from the presidency, but what they don't teach in civics class is that the Bush family's rise wasn't just political, it was financial, built on oil, intelligence, and access to war. It starts with Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's father, who was a banker at Brown Brothers Harriman. During the 1930s, the firm helped manage financial interests for German industrialist Fritz Thyssen, an early supporter of the Nazi Party. And while Prescott's role is debated, official U.S. government documents show the Union Banking Corporation, where Prescott sat on the board, was seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act in 1942. Let that sink in. While American soldiers were dying in Europe, a Bush-linked bank was managing Nazi money. But the family wasn't punished. They pivoted. After the war, George H.W. Bush launched Zapata Petroleum in 1953. It was an oil exploration company that on paper struggled. But Zapata got lucrative offshore drilling contracts in the Caribbean near Cuba, coinciding with CIA covert ops in the same region. Declassified memos and interviews suggest Zapata may have provided offshore logistical support for CIA operations in the 1960s. George H.W. Bush then became CIA director in 1976. By the 1980s, as vice president under Reagan, Bush oversaw U.S. intervention in Latin America, where oil and resource extraction always followed destabilization. Then came the Gulf War, 1991. Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, another oil-rich monarchy. Under Bush Sr., the U.S. responded with Operation Desert Storm. The war lasted 42 days. But oil prices surged by over 100%, and U.S. oil companies with Gulf access made a killing. Halliburton, where Cheney later became CEO, provided infrastructure support. Logistics Bush Sr. had greenlit. Then came George W. Bush, elected in 2000 after losing the popular vote, but winning the Electoral College with a Florida recount overseen by his brother Jeb, the governor. Months later came 9/11s. And in 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq under the pretense of WMDs, none of which were ever found. But what was found? Oil. Iraq holds the 5th largest proven reserves in the world. Post-invasion, Western companies, including ExxonMobil, Shell, and BP, were granted unprecedented access to Iraqi oil fields. The Bush family didn't directly profit from contracts, but their decades-long oil connections and political appointments ensured their allies did. And when Bush left office in 2009, oil companies had posted record profits. ExxonMobil alone earned $45 billion in net income in 2008, the highest corporate profit in U.S. history at the time. The Bushes are no longer in office, but their political machine, powered by war and oil, reshaped the global map and made sure their circle never missed a paycheck. The Scaife Mellon family, war journalism, and the business of influence. You've heard of Carnegie Mellon. But fewer people know that one of the founding families of that university also bankrolled Cold War weapons research, intelligence operations, and media manipulation, all while raking in profits from defense-linked steel, aluminum, and uranium. The Mellon fortune started with Andrew Mellon, Secretary of the Treasury in the 1920s, who helped finance the creation of Gulf Oil, Alcoa, the aluminum monopoly, and Westinghouse. When WY broke out, Alcoa supplied nearly 90% of the U.S. military's aluminum used for aircraft frames, bombs, and naval hardware. That's right, one Mellon-controlled company profited from nearly every American bomber and fighter plane in the air. But the real pivot came during the Cold War. Richard Mellon Scaife, heir to the Mellon fortune, quietly became one of the most powerful funders of right-wing think tanks and foreign policy initiatives. He backed the Heritage Foundation, American Enterprise Institute, and the Center for Strategic and International Studies institutions that pushed for an aggressive posture against the Soviet Union and later the War on Terror. These weren't academic bodies. They were ideological war engines. In the 1980s, Scaife's funds supported disinformation campaigns in Latin America, bolstering support for Reagan's Contras in Nicaragua. The Mellon-backed Gulf Oil had already operated in Angola and Venezuela, both destabilized during the Cold War. Coincidence? Not quite. Mellon's banking arms financed industrial projects that followed regime change. And here's the kicker. In 2003, Scaife funded outlets like the American Spectator and Newsmax ran editorials supporting the Iraq invasion, citing the very think tanks Scaife himself funded. Talk about vertical integration of war narrative. Meanwhile, Mellon-owned Alcoa landed major contracts to provide structural components for the F-22 Raptor and the Stryker armored vehicle, both deployed during the War on Terror. Between 2001 and 2010, Alcoa received over $2.5 billion in Pentagon contracts. Scaife also funded private intelligence outfits, like the now-defunct Western Goals Foundation, that exchanged information with the CIA. So while you thought Mellon wealth was about philanthropy, their real influence was ideological warfare, financed by steel, oil, and aluminum sold to the military. Richard Mellon Scaife died in 2014. His estate was worth $1.4 billion. But his real legacy? A media empire and defense-linked portfolio that ensured war didn't just profit arms dealers, it created billionaires from lobbyists, ideologues, and industrialists alike. 8. The Bechtel family engineering war, rebuilding the rubble. Most people have never heard of the Bechtel Corporation. That's by design. Because behind closed doors, Bechtel has quietly become one of the most powerful war reconstruction empires in American history. Based in San Francisco, this privately held company, controlled by the Bechtel family since 1898, has made its fortune not from fighting wars but from rebuilding everything after the bombs drop. In World War II, Bechtel constructed military infrastructure, airfields, shipyards, fuel depots. But their true rise began with the Cold War. Bechtel built nuclear test sites in Nevada, missile silos across the Midwest, and chemical plants used to manufacture nerve agents. During the Vietnam War, they were awarded contracts to build naval ports and repair facilities, despite being unlisted in most public records. Why? Because Bechtel operated in a legal gray zone, often under classified authorization. Then came Iraq. After the 2003 invasion, the U.S. launched a $60 billion reconstruction effort. Guess who landed one of the largest no-bid contracts? Bechtel. Over $2.4 billion in reconstruction awards, bridges, schools, power plants. The problem? Most of those projects were never completed. A 2006 audit found that Bechtel failed to finish 24 of 99 infrastructure projects it was paid for. In one case, a $75 million children's hospital in Basra was left half-finished, years behind schedule, with no functioning equipment. But here's the catch. The contract was cost-plus, meaning Bechtel got paid anyway, regardless of success. And the Bechtel family? They weren't sweating. George Shultz, a former Bechtel executive, served as Reagan's Secretary of State and helped secure Middle Eastern infrastructure deals. Caspar Weinberger, another Bechtel man, was Secretary of Defense. The revolving door was practically spinning. In Afghanistan, Bechtel secured contracts to build electrical grids and highways, many of which were later bombed, only to be rebuilt again. Between 2001 and 2020, Bechtel earned over $6 billion from military-related contracts. And because they're private, we have no idea how much profit they made. But here's what we do know. Bechtel family members sit on advisory boards at West Point, MIT, and Stanford. They fund think tanks and international panels. And they continue to profit from global instability. Every war creates rubble. Bechtel shows up with a blueprint and a $1 billion invoice. They didn't start the fire, but they definitely sold the fire alarms, rebuilt the house, and billed you for the paint. 7. The Raytheon network. Radar, missiles, and a war on the clock. You probably never asked who made the radar that spotted enemy aircraft in Depth-UIW, or who builds the Patriot missiles we send to allies. That would be Raytheon. Once a modest New England electronics firm, Raytheon became a cornerstone of the war profit complex by mastering one thing: high-tech dependency. Founded in 1922, Raytheon made its first real money during What's Up We building radar systems. But they didn't stop there. They pioneered guided missile systems by the 1950s and were crucial to U.S. operations in Vietnam, providing air defense and targeting systems for bombers. Fast forward to the 21st century, and Raytheon has become the king of smart warfare. During the Gulf War, Raytheon's Patriot missile systems became the poster child of U.S. dominance, intercepting Iraqi Scuds on CNN in grainy black and white. That visibility led to $3 billion in new contracts the following year. But what the public didn't know is that the Patriots missed over 60% of their targets, according to later Pentagon studies. Didn't matter. The perception was set. Raytheon got paid. In Iraq and Afghanistan, Raytheon supplied everything from missile guidance systems to drones to GPS targeting arrays. And like other defense giants, they benefited from the cost-plus model. In 2022 alone, Raytheon Technologies earned $67 billion in revenue, over 50% of it from government contracts. And they've perfected the art of selling escalation. Every time the U.S. sends weapons to Ukraine or Israel, Raytheon stocks jump. They're now one of the largest suppliers of missiles to NATO. And here's something even darker. In 2021, Raytheon's CEO publicly stated that conflict creates opportunities for the company. The statement was so brazen it triggered backlash, but nothing changed. No government official canceled contracts. Raytheon now manufactures the Tomahawk cruise missile, the AMRAAM air-to-air missile, and components for the Iron Dome. Every one of those systems is deployed in active conflicts right now. Every explosion has a contract attached. Every missile strike triggers another requisition order. That's not conspiracy. That's the procurement cycle. Raytheon spends over $4 million annually on lobbying, and their board includes retired generals, former Pentagon procurement officers, and even ex-Congress members. They don't need to influence policy, they write it, and every war, from Syria to Gaza to Ukraine, becomes a showcase for their products. It's not about winning wars anymore, it's about sustaining them, one contract at a time. 6. The BlackRock Vanguard Loop, profiting from all sides, all wars, always now. We reach the invisible hand behind the entire war machine, the institutional investors. You've probably heard the names BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, but most people don't understand what they really are. These are not traditional defense contractors. They don't make missiles, build bases, or sell fuel. They own the companies that do. As of 2024, BlackRock and Vanguard together hold significant ownership stakes in every single one of the top 5 U.S. defense contractors: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing. That means every time Congress approves a new defense package, these firms make money, regardless of which company gets the contract. It's the ultimate vertical monopoly. And here's where it gets sinister. BlackRock manages over $10 trillion in global assets. That's larger than the GDP of every country on Earth except the US and China. Vanguard is close behind with $8 trillion. Together, they own controlling stakes in more than 90% of the S&P 500. So when war breaks out, stock prices for defense companies spike. BlackRock and Vanguard benefit, not because they sell weapons, but because they hold the portfolios that do. They're the casino, and they always win. During the Ukraine war, BlackRock launched a Ukraine Reconstruction Fund, pitching it as a humanitarian effort. But the fund's structure channels money into rebuilding war-damaged industries that benefit private contractors, including Halliburton spin-offs and Bechtel affiliates. That's right, war destruction becomes an investment product. And because they hold stakes in global media, banks, and defense firms, BlackRock and Vanguard profit from every link in the chain. Need proof? When the Israel-Hamas war intensified in 2023, Lockheed shares surged 7%. Raytheon jumped 5%. Guess who owned the top mutual funds holding those stocks? Vanguard. BlackRock. The same two firms advising the Pentagon on global security investment strategy. The revolving door is now algorithmic. They don't need to lobby Congress. They are Congress. Their investment arms manage federal pensions, defense industry 401ks, and even the Federal Reserve's emergency bond programs. It's no longer about selling missiles. It's about managing the index that profits from war. And that's where we leave off. Because what comes next makes everything you've heard so far seem quaint by comparison. The Rothschild financial web war bonds, central banks, and global leverage. Most people think of the Rothschild name as some old-world European banking dynasty. That's not wrong, but it's dangerously incomplete. The Rothschilds weren't just in banking during wars. They created the template for how global war is financed. From Napoleon to Ukraine, their financial descendants have built the invisible rails of war capital, bonds, currencies, debt insurance, and taken a cut from every bullet fired. It started in the 1800s when Nathan Mayer Rothschild funded the British war effort against Napoleon. After the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, Rothschild agents reportedly used private couriers to get the news back to London before anyone else. The legend says Nathan sold off his British bonds in a panic, causing others to follow suit, and then bought them all back at rock-bottom prices once the panic peaked. Overnight, he allegedly made the equivalent of $100 million in today's money. Whether the legend is embellished or not, one thing is documented: the Rothschilds became Europe's wartime lenders. By the mid-1800s, they were funding both sides of multiple European conflicts, including the Crimean War. Their banks weren't choosing sides, they were selling the gunpowder and charging interest on the cannonballs. Fast forward to today, and the Rothschild influence hasn't vanished, it's transmuted. Rothschild & Co., the French-British investment bank, advises more than 60 national governments on sovereign debt and defense budgeting. During the 2008 global financial crisis, they quietly advised defense ministries on how to preserve military spending while cutting civilian programs. That's right, when hospitals were being defunded, military budgets were protected. In 2022, Rothschild & Co. was the lead financial advisor to the Ukrainian government, structuring debt, managing wartime borrowing, and creating investment frameworks for post-war reconstruction. That's not speculation. That's in their own public disclosures. They're not just profiting from war. They're managing the spreadsheet that war runs on. Even in the US, their fingerprints are deeper than you think. Rothschild's American affiliates have advised Raytheon and Lockheed on international mergers. Their London bank chairs defense symposia in NATO-aligned think tanks. And while the Rothschild name isn't stamped on missiles, their balance sheets are. They aren't listed contractors. They're global underwriters, selling invisible war bonds that don't go on CNN, but still make a killing. They're the reason wars are prepaid. And that means war isn't about victory. It's about interest payments. And for over 200 years, the Rothschild formula has been: lend before the war, finance both sides, structure the peace deal, and then finance the rebuilding. 1 war, 5 revenue streams. That's not a pattern. That's a business model. 4. The Boeing empire. War in the skies, profits on the ground. Everybody knows Boeing for passenger jets. 737s, 747s. But here's what nobody tells you. Commercial aircraft make headlines. Military aircraft make billions. Boeing's involvement in war is not an accessory. It's the core. From World War I biplanes to B-52 bombers to modern stealth drones, Boeing has been building the wings of American war for over 100 years, and they've never had a bad war. Let's go back. In DEP-2EG, Boeing made the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-29 Superfortress, the same model that dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In just 4 years, Boeing delivered over 12,000 heavy bombers. The company's wartime revenue ballooned by 1,200%. That wasn't just defense work, it was mass production of mass death, and the government footed every bill. By the Korean War, Boeing was producing fighter jets. In Vietnam, they manufactured the Chinook helicopter, a workhorse used in nearly every major ground operation. But Boeing wasn't content just to build. They started designing multi-decade programs, like the B-52 Stratofortress, first flown in 1952 and still in service today. That's 70 years of profit from a single design. Then came the Pentagon's love affair with big-ticket projects. In the 1990s, Boeing acquired McDonnell Douglas, maker of the F-15, the F-A-18, and space systems. Overnight, Boeing became the second-largest defense contractor in the world. Their merger wasn't about innovation, it was about locking up supply chains and congressional districts. Today, Boeing builds the KC-46 aerial refueling tanker, the MQ-25 autonomous drone, and the P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft, all critical to current operations in the Middle East, Asia-Pacific, and Eastern Europe. Each contract is multi-billion, and each one overruns. The KC-46 was $3 billion over budget by 2023, and still had over 70 documented deficiencies. But here's the key to Boeing's power. They don't just build hardware, they manufacture doctrine. Boeing-funded think tanks at RAND and CSIS produce wargaming scenarios that push air power solutions. And guess who sells the planes that those scenarios require? Boeing. It's a feedback loop, where the problem and the solution come from the same boardroom. They spend over $15 million annually on lobbying, and have over 200 registered lobbyists in D.C. as of 2024. That's more than the EPA, CDC, and FEMA combined. And during the Ukraine conflict, Boeing's stock rose 20% in 6 months, driven by renewed NATO contracts. That's not coincidence. That's policy sculpted to fit a product line. War is no longer something that happens. It's something that's scheduled, budgeted, and serviced by Boeing, with a maintenance plan and a dividend check. The Carlyle Group, where presidents, princes, and war merge. You've probably never bought a Carlyle Group product, and that's the point. You don't see Carlyle. You live in a world shaped by them. The Carlyle Group is a Washington, D.C.-based private equity firm with over $400 billion under management. But they don't just invest in weapons companies. They own them. United Defense, Vought Aircraft, and part suppliers for every branch of the U.S. military. Their strategy? Buy mid-tier defense firms, inflate value during wartime procurement booms, and then flip them to larger contractors pocketing billions. Think of them as the Wall Street scalpers of war. But here's where it gets disturbing. In the early 2000s, Carlyle's board included former President George H.W. Bush. His presence alone opened doors around the globe. On September 11, 2001, the day of the attacks, the Carlyle Group was hosting a conference in Washington, attended by, wait for it, the Bin Laden family. Yes, that Bin Laden family. The same Saudi elites whose relative orchestrated 9/11s. The family was a major investor in Carlyle. After public outrage, they quietly pulled out. But the connection remains part of the permanent record. Carlyle used the war on terror to make billions. They sold United Defense to BAE Systems in 2005 for $4.2 billion after tripling its value through Iraq and Afghanistan contracts. Meanwhile, they expanded into cybersecurity, satellite imaging, and drone logistics. In 2023, they launched a new fund targeting conflict-resilient infrastructure, a euphemism for rebuilding in war-torn zones. Sound familiar? It's Bechtel 2.0, but with leveraged buyouts and hedge fund returns. And Carlyle's reach extends beyond hardware. They own telecommunications, surveillance software, and even pharmaceutical companies tied to military procurement. They don't just profit when wars start. They profit when veterans need care, when intelligence agencies upgrade servers, and when drone pilots need faster networks. Every slice of the military economy, they've carved out a seat. This isn't a contractor. This is a holding company for empire. And the boardroom isn't just ex-generals, it's ex-presidents, ex-prime ministers, former CIA directors, and foreign royalty. In 2022, Carlyle had over 50 former government officials across its advisory boards. That's not influence, that's shadow governance. And when your business model relies on war, peace becomes an existential threat. 2. The House of Saud, oil for war for oil, and the American Protection Contract. Here's the truth. Almost no American hears in school. The single most profitable war arrangement in U.S. history wasn't a company contract or a defense merger. It was the handshake between Franklin D. Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz ibn Saud in 1945 aboard the USS Quincy. That conversation, barely an hour long, created an unbreakable pact. Saudi Arabia gives the United States oil. The United States gives Saudi Arabia weapons, protection, and geopolitical muscle. And that pact has generated more war wealth than DuPont, Lockheed, Halliburton, and Exxon combined. Because it did something deeper than sell weapons. It embedded a monarchy inside the bloodstream of American global strategy. Let's break it down. Saudi Arabia controls over 17% of the world's proven oil reserves. That's roughly 263 billion barrels, much of it located in extremely low-cost fields where extraction costs as little as $4 a barrel. Meanwhile, the global oil price has averaged between $50 and $100 for the last 20 years. That margin, tens of billions every year, flows directly into the House of Saud. But here's the war profit twist. Those profits don't stay in Saudi Arabia. They get recycled into American assets. A 2023 Treasury disclosure revealed that the Saudis hold over $135 billion in U.S. treasuries and another estimated $800+ billion in U.S. stocks, private equity, tech investments, and real estate. The Saudis are literally bankrolling the American financial system, and in exchange, the U.S. military serves as their life insurance policy. Now here's the dark part. Every major Middle Eastern conflict since 1945 has aligned, usually quietly, with Saudi strategic interests. The 1953 Iran coup? Saudi-backed. The anti-communist wars in Yemen? Saudi elite-funded. The Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s? Saudi Arabia financed Saddam Hussein with over $25 billion, while the U.S. provided intelligence. After 9/11s, despite the fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals, the U.S. did not sanction Saudi Arabia, didn't blackball their banks, didn't seize their assets. Instead, the U.S. expanded arms sales. Between 2001 and 2023, the U.S. sold Saudi Arabia over $170 billion worth of weapons, making them the #1 buyer of American arms on Earth. Every bomb dropped in Yemen, every precision missile launched by Saudi jets, every armored vehicle deployed along their borders, that's U.S. defense money flowing back into American contractors. Saudi Arabia gets war dominance in its region. The U.S. gets the money, the oil security and the petrodollar system that keeps American currency at the center of global trade. But here's the most shocking part. In 2024, the Saudi Public Investment Fund partnered with BlackRock. Yes, the same BlackRock from number 6, to develop a $50 billion infrastructure and conflict-resilient investment portfolio. Translation: war volatility itself has become an asset class, and the Saudis are investing so deeply in the U.S. system that any destabilization, oil spikes, regional wars, sanctions, naval blockades, makes them richer and strengthens their strategic dependence with Washington. This isn't a military alliance. It's a war-profit marriage, built on oil, bombs, and the U.S. dollar itself. And no matter what you think of it morally, the numbers don't lie. Saudi Arabia isn't just involved in American war profit. In many ways, they helped invent the modern version of it. 1. The British Crown corporate network, mining, intelligence, and the original war profit empire. If you want to understand the final layer of the war profit pattern, the layer that predates the Pentagon, predates NATO, predates even the idea of America, you have to look at the British Empire and the corporate web it left behind. Because the most profitable war machine in modern history wasn't born in a lab or a factory. It was born in the colonial financial system that turned global conflict into a commodities market. The British Crown built a structure where the same families who controlled mining rights, shipping lanes, banking systems, and intelligence networks generated profit from every conflict they touched. And even though the empire is gone, the companies that grew out of it, BP, Rio Tinto, BAE Systems, Glencore, Barclays, HSBC, continue to profit from war like it's a renewable resource. Let's start with BP. Originally the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, BP was formed after the British government secretly seized oil rights in Iran in 1908. For decades, they controlled 98% of Iranian oil profits. When Iran's Democratic Prime Minister nationalized the oil industry in 1951, BP panicked. 2 years later, MI6 and the CIA orchestrated Operation Ajax, the coup that overthrew the Iranian government and reinstalled the Shah. Why? To protect BP's oil revenue. That single coup led to 25 years of authoritarian rule, the Iranian Revolution, and 40 years of U.S.-Iran hostility. One coup, a century of geopolitical instability, and it was triggered by an oil company. Then there's BAE Systems, the world's largest arms dealer outside the U.S. BAE isn't just a contractor, it's practically an extension of the British state. Between 2000 and 2020, BAE sold more than $150 billion in weapons to Saudi Arabia alone, including Eurofighter jets used extensively in the Yemen war. British intelligence agencies MI5 and MI6 routinely coordinate with BAE to facilitate deals, evade oversight, and negotiate behind closed doors. In 2006, a massive bribery investigation revealed BAE had paid Saudi officials over $2 billion in secret payments. Did it stop them? No. Prime Minister Tony Blair personally shut down the investigation, saying it threatened national security. Translation: BAE was too profitable to prosecute. And then there's the mining network. Rio Tinto, De Beers, Glencore. These companies operate in conflict zones across Africa and have long been accused, sometimes proven, of benefiting from coups, civil wars, and militia violence. When the Congo erupted in conflict in the 1990s and 2000s, Glencore expanded its copper and cobalt operations. When Sierra Leone fell to civil war, De Beers's diamond profits rose. When Afghanistan's rare earth metal deposits became strategically crucial, British-linked firms began maneuvering for access even before the war ended. But the real crown jewel? The City of London, the financial square mile that operates as a semi-autonomous state within the UK. It controls trillions in assets, oversees global shipping insurance, and handles clearing operations for most global commodities, including oil, metals, and defense financing. The City of London doesn't just profit from war contracts. It profits from every ripple war creates: insurance spikes, currency shocks, shipping reroutes, sovereign debt refinancing. It is the quiet clearinghouse of global conflict. Together, this crown corporate network doesn't make weapons or invade countries. It creates the economic architecture that turns conflict into revenue. And unlike lobbyists or defense contractors, these institutions survive every regime change, every recession, every war. The British Empire may have crumbled, but the war profit machine it built? That legacy is immortal. That's the pattern. And now you've seen all of it. Wars don't just happen. They're budgeted, lobbied for, pre-financed, pre-insured, pre-profited. And when the smoke clears, the same names always walk away richer, while soldiers come home in boxes or not at all. This isn't conspiracy. This is capitalism without brakes. The DuPonts made billions from explosives. The Rockefellers pumped oil into every tank that rolled across Europe. The Morgans lent money to both sides and charged interest. Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, they don't build weapons to win wars. They build weapons to extend them. And now, BlackRock, Vanguard, and the global financial class don't just profit off one side, they profit off all sides every time. Since 2001, over $14 trillion has been spent on U.S. wars and foreign military operations. That's $43,000 per American citizen, money taken from your taxes, your kids' education, your roads, your hospitals, your future. You didn't vote for it, you didn't benefit from it, but you paid for it. Meanwhile, the same families own the defense stocks, write the policy papers, lobby Congress, and host the think tanks on Sunday morning news shows telling you why another war is necessary. They don't just exploit conflict, they engineer it. Because peace has no quarterly growth. Peace doesn't boost stock buybacks. Peace doesn't create billionaires. But war does, every single time. So next time you hear about a foreign enemy, a military operation, or a crisis overseas that needs intervention, don't ask who the enemy is. Ask who stands to profit. Who already bought the stocks? Who got the contracts before the bombs dropped? Because once you see the war profit pattern, you can't unsee it. And that's when the real fight begins.